This is a monthly series designed to help give you a unique inside perspective of the programs, people, priorities, and partnerships of the Penn State College of Agricultural Sciences. So I'm Rick Roush. I'm the Dean of the College of Agricultural Sciences. And I'm truly excited to welcome you to these Ag Progress Days, and I'll serve as your host for this session. But before we begin, I just want to point out that we're offering this program both in person and via Zoom. We are also recording the session, and we'll be sharing the link with all who registered. And if you missed it, you can find it on Look Up College Connections online. So it's a town hall format and discussion of the state of Pennsylvania Ag. Today, I'm joined by the Secretary of Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, Russell Redding. Some brief opening remarks will be addressing questions both from our online and in-person audiences. Some of you included questions during your registration, and we'll try to address those first, either in our opening remarks or during the Q&A that follow. If time permits, we will also take questions from the audience today through the Q&A link in Zoom or at the microphones for those of you who are here today. So let's get to it, and welcome Secretary Redding. We need no further introduction for some opening words.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Dean Roush, and to the Penn State team for hosting Ag Progress Days. But this is sort of 3 days of out of the entire year that we get a chance to sort of celebrate agriculture here with the Dean and Penn State. But it's also just a small touch point of the work that's done by Penn State throughout the year. And I just want to say thank you to the Dean and his team for all that they do. Also, just as we look around, to say thanks to those who are here. I mean, we do what we do. I'm sure I'm speaking for the Dean as well. As a department, we do what we do in partnerships, right? It's all about the county governments. It's about our county leadership and organizations and so many others as I look around this room are here. So thank you for that partnership as well. We are reminded always during Ag Progress Days, I think, of what we are collectively entrusted with, right? It's both an industry and the work, it's the knowledge and people, it's the land, it's the issues that sort of make agriculture function, but also the larger society function, right? And having this conversation with you is always helpful and get the Dean's perspective. I always appreciate, and we had the good fortune, I think, of signing on me to the administration and the Dean as Dean of College of Ag about the same time. And I've always appreciated his perspective, the international perspective he brings to the table in discussion, the geographic diversity of discussions from the West Coast to the East Coast is always helpful. It is wonderful to have an entomologist as your Dean when you're fighting spotted lanternfly, right? Just to make that list is just a few of the items. But most importantly, though, we have recognized, I think, mutually that we cannot do what we are expected to do without each other. Right? And I think that's the symbiotic relationship between the land grant and the Department of Agriculture. And everybody here sort of assumes that that is normal, right? That is not normal. I mean, we have meetings across the country with our colleagues who share that there are differences, right? You don't have the relationship that we and the department have with our land grant in Penn State. And I don't know how they do their jobs, by the way, but we are very fortunate here in Pennsylvania to have that excellent working relationship. And it shows up every day. You know, a couple of examples, and certainly the most recent with the high path avian influenza, right? We have our regulatory role, but we could not do what we've done to contain and suppress the high path AI without the Animal Health Diagnostic Commission, without the paddles system, but also without the subject matter experts at Penn State University, right? Really critical. We can talk more about that. I mentioned spotted lanternfly, right, as another one of those, call to action that Penn State took on early on in 2014. First time it was spotted in America was in Berks County, Pennsylvania in 2014. And it's been a journey since, but could not do the work without extension and the research as well. But we have, the work of animal agriculture. This is an animal ag state, making sure we're on top of the animal disease, the productivity, looking at what we've done in the environment and conservation with Matt Royer, who's here. And just a note of thanks to Matt. But again, continues to build, and with the most recent state budget, a new investment, but also new expectations for what we have to do in terms of conservation as well. And then just to round it out, I think the work on the Pennsylvania Farm Bill, right, really critical both for what it provides in terms of resources through things like the specialty crop block grant program and some of the research efforts and partnerships that are recognized in that, but also the resources that Penn State and Extension particularly make available to Pennsylvanians who want to take advantage of different elements of the Farm Bill, whether it be the Ag Business Development Center or Farm to School or the conservation work as examples. So there's much I can say, but nothing more important than a simple thank you. For the partnership with Penn State, the vision that the dean and the team have, and also just the spirit of the work, and I think living that mission that sort of Congress and President Lincoln sort of envisioned, right, of that access of being able to teach and research and extend that knowledge to the citizens of the country, and we do it here in Pennsylvania. So part of that, I think, is a great story. So thank you. Look forward to being with you, the dean and team, as well as the questions that you may have. Okay, thank you.
So thank you, Secretary Redding. And for me, I also appreciate everything, all the collaboration we have, and the fact that you know Pennsylvania agriculture really well and the federal system really well. And I well remember we took a trip together to go talk to the federal government about what to do about spotted lanternfly, which was a great experience too. So we complement each other in terms of our interests. So today, one of the things we want to talk about is the state of Pennsylvania agriculture, but also the opportunities. And one of the questions that I was asked, how would I define the college's areas of excellence? And there's a strong overlap, because I think one of the real opportunities for Pennsylvania is climate change. When I first arrived in Pennsylvania, people often say, hey, what are our chances of producing more fruits and vegetables and competing with California? I said, you know, they're extremely well organized. It's worked there for 10 years. Like, I see their strengths. They're organized to market globally, but a lot's changed in the last 7 years. Tree ring records show that California and Arizona and so forth are now in the worst drought in something like 1,200 years, and they're not getting out of it quickly. And so I think this is an opportunity, even maybe an obligation for a state that's got pretty fair rainfall in the future, like Pennsylvania, to do a lot more about producing fruits, but especially vegetable production. The great salad bowls of the West, like Salinas Valley and El Centro, California, and in Yuma, Arizona, they're all drying up. And so someone needs to fill that gap. And it won't just happen because we wish it. Hope is not a strategy, as we discussed yesterday, but one of the things we need to think about quickly is a strategy about how to take advantage of this opportunity, but also help serve the national and international need. And in terms of excellence, it's a great area for the college and for the Department of Agriculture to collaborate, because the college is very strong. Blair Zigfried pointed this out to me a couple of days ago. We were talking about what the areas of excellence were. And we've got a lot of capacity in soil health, microbiomes, agricultural economics, cover cropping, no-till, water quality. Matt Royer was just mentioned, research and extension, all these areas that fit well with trying to do this. And one of the opportunities we can exploit is the USDA has established a program on climate smart agriculture, which, as I interpret it, seeks to drive more sustainable production by providing commodity premiums for people who are using smart systems. Well, where are we in Pennsylvania? We've already done a pretty good job of establishing no-till and cover cropping as major regenerative tactics in maintaining water quality and so forth. And we lead the nation. There's only 3 states, us. We're about third. There's 3 leading states, including Pennsylvania, that have the highest combined adoption of no-till and cover cropping. And so first off, that gives us a pretty good place we don't have to spend 5 years building that. We can exploit that already and demonstrate what the capacity is. So the college, led by Blair and Greta, have put together a multi-million-dollar grant to try in Climate Smart program to see if we can get some funding to try to approach this. So I think there are tremendous opportunities there. The other things, we've got a lot of emerging technologies and agricultural applications, particularly the need, if we do produce more vegetables and fruits, we'll probably have to think of more ways to mechanize planting, harvesting, pruning, the whole bit, because it's clear that one of our big challenges going in the future will still be labor and adequate supplies of labor. And the federal government has just passed a massive bill to try to drive increased production of computer chips in the United States. That's a golden opportunity if you're sitting in a place that's going to try to drive chip manufacturer to sort of influence some of the ground floor about what kinds of technologies are needed from those chips beyond the ones they might otherwise have thought about. So that's a great opportunity for us in Pennsylvania to act on this. And we've got folks already in agriculture and biological engineering looking at these kinds of technologies. Workforce development is a huge thing. Still, we're doing more and more with stackable credentials. We can talk more about that later, but really trying to make various kinds of training options, a whole range of training opportunities available to people. And one of the other things that's a real opportunity for us is the federal government in 2018 in the Farm Bill passed a bill that included research facilities modernization. It's been estimated that there's about $11.5 billion of lapse building upkeep, maintenance, and so forth across the United States, land grants, about 100 to 110 million in Penn State alone. And so it's really important to try to fund this initiative and try to drive that increase, that restoration of the competitiveness of U.S. agriculture in terms of getting its research done. And people often talk about competition with China. I had the good fortune while I was at the University of Melbourne to travel to all the major agricultural universities in China, and they're competitive. When people are saying that, they're not just inventing a specter. There's a real competition in agriculture out there. We need to get on our game. Or a few years ago, people always worried that Monsanto would have the IP for seeds and technology across America. The real challenge at this point is make sure it's not the Chinese that control the IP and the seed accessibility. So we need to lift our game and do more in that area. And the Research Facilities Act is a great opportunity for Pennsylvania and the nation as a whole. And it's something we should all support trying to get through Congress. So with that, just open up to put your hands, Secretary.
Well, so let me, I know this was a question labeled for you.
Yeah.
Right. So from my perspective, part of the greatest areas of excellence is, I think, the land grant model. Right. I keep thinking about that as an opportunity that differentiates you from anybody else, right, in this university, is that you have but one, and sort of an expectation, I think, public expectation, public access, but it's the convergence of the disciplines where you have, right, you've got your College of Ag, but it's the engineering and health, and particularly the university with a health system and the business. I think of the things we need to do and expected to have that all available inside one institution with a model of a land grant that both sets an expectation for access, but you're taking that knowledge and transferring that knowledge to those who need it. Right? Yeah, it's not, and I think that model is a beautiful model that speaks to all of these sort of things that we're expected. Ag and food system at large is expected to deal with, and then you add the energy dynamics to that, the technology pieces. And I think we're in a great spot, and it's an area of excellence that differentiates the university and a College of Ag in a way that nobody else can speak to. I think that's just a general topic, but I think there's a convergence of issues where that's where you're going to find the answers. Yeah. Right. So anyway, thanks for letting me tag on.
Yeah, that's right. So just the first question that was submitted, we're on this one of excellence. There are other things I want to acknowledge. Another area of excellence for our college is just our students and the faculty, staff, and stakeholders that support them. That's a great source of excellence for us. Our research is very strong. Our competitiveness of research is strong. Blair Siegfried's been digging out the stats on me. If I remember it right, Blair, that we're in the top 3 in the country on average over the last 4 years from competitive funds from NIFA. We're in the top 3, and 1 and 2 are Texas A&M and the University of Florida, who are vastly bigger than we are. So, I mean, that's a pretty, we're batting well above our weight in terms of our competitiveness and grants. So there are lots of, the college has lots of strengths and we're all very proud of. Fantastic accomplishments by students picking up awards and so forth. So it's excellent across the board. So with that, Now, the next big question was, Secretary, what's been the economic impacts in Pennsylvania so far of high pathogenicity avian flu?
Yeah, so it's still probably too early to give a complete answer to that, but just the expenditures between the USDA and PDA for response and indemnity of the poultry and cleanup and testing is around 34 million to date. And keeping in mind that that is for 17 blocks in Pennsylvania. When you think about the potential of what could have been, I think that's sort of the untold story of when you start drawing the control zones and surveillance zones. You've got 1,017 flocks in Lancaster County alone, right? There are 300 within a couple of those circles. So this could have gone horribly wrong. So to my point in the opening statement about the work with Penn State to really work to contain and suppress it, and the work of the paddle system and our partnership with Penn Vet and PDA, very proud of that. So initial cost of 34 million. I will say that continues to be refined as payments are made and expenses are filed. And that also included sort of the contract support that we needed on the front side. Just for perspective, in the early weeks of April, when this first broke, we had over 400 people in the field, right, responding to high path avian influenza. So not an insignificant response. A lot of that was done through the contract support. So how does that break down? You've got about 15 million or so that's paid to producers for the birds in the virus elimination, and about 19 million in costs that are USDA and PDA, as well as the contractors. The second part of this is sort of what the governor and the legislature did in this recent budget of having funds for recovery. And there's a $25 million fund that was established for high path avian influenza recovery. Just to state, it should be obvious that everything to getting somebody back in business was sort of covered out of indemnity funds or USDA, but recovery is completely separate and not paid for in any form by the USDA. So that's where the state is now taking the lead here with the legislature and governor. I'm pleased to say we've got the fund established. It is open, and as of this week, we've got 8 applications that are already filed for reimbursement on the recovery fund. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, the next one. What do you feel is the most significant challenge facing agriculture in today's world? What do you think, Secretary Richard?
Wow. It's I could make a list. I guess I would say that there are a couple of things that I think we're challenged by, and the most challenging I think is I think the workforce at large, right? Because I think the one thing that we don't spend a lot of time talking about is that as the ag industry has changed and the adoption of technology, it begins to look a lot like other forms of business. And therefore, you're attracting and trying to attract the same skills that you need in agriculture, or the employer down the street who may be in some other type of manufacturing wants the same skill, right? So to me, it's that competition for those skills and building the base, if you will, but recognizing that you also have to, in ag, I think, convince a lot of the public that agriculture is a place of meaningful employment. And it's not always understood, right? What they see on the evening news, they see really hard, dirty, work, right? In the fields. I get it. It's a spectrum of things that we need. Excuse me. So I would say the workforce translated to both the for what we need. And I think something that Sarah Glagora and I spent a lot of time. You also then have to get the system to respond to that, right? It should function much like other sectors of our economy, right? Like the healthcare or manufacturing. Make your list. And right now, the workforce system doesn't respond. in that way. And I think that's something that, much like the economic development system didn't work that way until we changed it. So I put workforce at the top of the list, followed by a really close second of processing. And, we hear it all the time on the meat side. That is just the tip of that iceberg. I think it really is something coming out of COVID. Going into COVID, we were challenged. Coming out of COVID, we were really challenged, right, to build that processing capacity for our products. It's related to what farmers particularly have expressed about the limited marketing options. Have a lot to do with what processing options they have, right? And whether they want a direct sale is about a processing option. Whether they want to add value to any form is a processing question. So where does all that happen? So I think that to me is one that stands out. I'm not sure that I would have put it there initially, but as we keep looking at the meats and the meat processing just as one component, I think for Pennsylvania to remain competitive, you've got to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. You differentiate yourself by market access. That means adding value to the product, right? That means processing. So there are several others to include climate and I think increasingly China. Right? We have hitched our wagon to China in terms of access. I mean, you've been there many times, and just the recent conversations of what's playing out in the Taiwan Straits, et cetera. That these are the folks who are also expecting to buy a lot of our product. Right. So how that relationship goes has a lot to say about what happens here, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
So the one I would add is water on a global scale. The biggest challenges is insufficient water. So even without climate change, the predictions were that the increased demand for water for urbanization and mining alone was going to compete with agriculture in many areas of the world. There's not enough to go around. So that's going to be a big challenge. For all the young people in front, that's going to be a big challenge in their lifetimes. Figure this out. I had in my international travels, an interesting experience. In 1998, I went to Cape Town to look for predators of a mite problem in Australia, and we found it. But while I was there, I was introduced to a fellow named Guy Preston, who was the Deputy Minister for Environment for Cape Province, and he was managing to hire tens of thousands of people to clear Australian acacias that had gone feral and are covering the slopes around Cape Town. And they did this to remove these trees, which were otherwise sucking water out of the water table and throwing it back up in the atmosphere through their leaves. And they realized they weren't getting water out of the streams, and rivers were flowing out of the mountains. So they removed these weedy trees. And I was back 5 years later on this time on a weed contingent of Australian weed scientists. And I caught up with him, and he sent us all out to look at this an example of one of the places they'd worked. And he said the stream was running there when they cleared the trees, the stream started running again for the first time in decades. So, and then just about 3 years ago, you might have noticed in headlines that Cape Town was within a week of going dry. A city of 500,000 people within a week of going dry. And I think the takeaway lesson from that is Guy Preston knew what needed to get done, had his hands on the wheels of government, and could make the change. And it was almost not enough. And he started in 1998. So I think for me, that's a sobering thing. Chennai in China, or Chennai in India. We've got lots of other places that haven't even started on that 20-year journey. And that still might not be enough. So it's a sobering thing. We need to get onto it. So water's a big deal. How can more farmland be preserved? I'm really impressed with what a great job farmland preservation Pennsylvania's already done.
Yeah, and more to do. I mean, so we're proud of Pennsylvania's farmland preservation program. We're 600,000 acres plus that have been preserved in perpetuity. 6,000 plus farms in the state, and it's been a 25 plus year run to do that. But much more to do. We've got 1,200 farms on the backlog list. These are farms that have gone through a county evaluation process and have raised their hand and said, I want to have my farm preserved. So just that group alone, if you stop today, you've got 1,200 farms that want to be in the program. So how do you do more, right? This is always the question for us. It is about resources. right? It's about financial resources, number one. Two, I think it's how you use the resources. A direct appropriation clearly would be helpful, and we see that again in this budget of about 40 million. But it's also making sure that we are working in full partnership with the land trusts in the state, who've done a phenomenal job. I think that's an opportunity for us. They're part of our network, but I think we could probably do a lot more with them. They've got the capacity to do it. They've got the relationship with particularly in Pennsylvania, the Plainset community, really critical partner to preserve the farms. But I think there's capacity there to do more. We certainly need to look at, I think, stronger zoning, particularly around residential and commercial, land, commercial development, and keeping it off of those class 1 through 4 soils. Right? There's nothing more painful than to drive these roads and see your prime agricultural soils. It's a statement of public policy to preserve this land. And why are we doing that? For long-term food production, security and access, right? So there's a long-term commitment. There's a reason the deeds say, it is a perpetual easement. That is forever in one day. It'll never change. But we are seeing the challenges with zoning. So I put it out there. I know the sensitivities around it, but it's the only way that you can sort of draw lines between where your prime agricultural land is and long-term expectations, and then try to figure out how do you get an easement, a covenant on it. But so there's a lot to do there. I would also just say, from a clean and green standpoint, a preferential tax program in the state, there's 10 million acres that are in the clean and green program. It's not a perpetual easement. It doesn't put a restriction on it other than what's included in terms of the taxation restriction. But so I think that's another way.
Yeah, this is another one. We're sort of victims of our own history. I mean, where would towns and cities have been founded? They had to be founded in a place where the soils are good enough to grow crops and water. So you had cities grow up in New York and Philadelphia and San Diego because they had the right conditions. And then what did we do? We started paving over the very land that made it possible to grow crops and feed the population in the first place. So we've got to get out of that mold, I think.
Yeah, I think it's, it's the debate. I'm just thankful that, in the 1980s, there was a vision, for preserving this prime land. I mean, I don't know what it would be today. I mean, you'd obviously be very challenged to preserve anything, but it happened, right? Yeah. And it's comforting to know that those farms are there and they'll be our agricultural base for years to come. But there's also a need to, move more aggressively and, to preserve the backlog farms. Because I'm not sure how long they'll wait, right? There's no restriction on them. They just have a desire to preserve. So, but it takes, I say it all the time, it takes advocacy on our behalf and the public's part to invest in farmland preservation, right? These are not a gift, right? These are exchanges that are made between, I'll give up something for the right, I'll compensate you. That's a really important covenant that you're entering with this generation. And making a lot of assumptions about those to follow, but making sure that we also do that on the federal side, right? And seeing the RCPP and the ASEP program are all part of the answer. Yeah.
So the next question was directed at me. Are there extensive agricultural training opportunities readily available for non-degree students? Boy, have we got training opportunities for you. Extension, the answer is extension. Numerous non-credit training programs, standalone courses, others articulate to certificate programs. We've got apprenticeships. They're designed to both in person and online. I think if there was one blessing came out of COVID, it was people suddenly discovered they could do a lot of training online before they'd sort of written it off. So we have it. People can get the training how, when, where they want it. There'll be more about this afternoon in this very space at 1 p.m. during the transition farmer session. And I think I'll hear from a few people in Extension who can talk about that. But yeah, go to the Penn State Extension website and look around. You'll find lots of things there. So and then the next one is directed to me. Where are the current hotspots for spotted lantfly this year? What are the trends in populations of the original hotspots? So I pulled part of our brain trust earlier, Brian Walsh, Julie Urban, Joe Keller, Kelly Hoover, and others. And I want to acknowledge stand up, Julie. You should stand up, Julie. Thank Julie for a lot of things, because when we discovered lanternflies, she was willing to step forward and lead the program into the future, for which we're very grateful. And it's generated tens, well, not quite tens of millions, but 7 millions in grant funding to Penn State and other groups. So that's been great. So yes, what's been happening with it? The feedback was that the hotspots seem to be in places like New Jersey vineyards at the eastern Pennsylvania border, because we know that grapes are a major attractive host for it, along with Tree of Heaven. Pittsburgh has had a lot of activity. We held we knew this was coming and had a meeting out there a couple of years ago to highlight it. So it's picking up in Pittsburgh. New York City has become, there's famous, you see lots of stories and so forth about people trying to kill spotted lanternflies in New York City now, but also they're in Cleveland. We've even had a report now from some in Iowa. So they're scattered across really about a dozen states now it's turning into. So there are lots of things. There are a lot of hotspots around. We're trying to do our best to sort of quarantine Erie to see if we can keep them from getting established in Erie. So we're trying that. The other question is a really interesting one. Are there trends in population in the regional hotspots? And what we often observe is there'll be an explosion in a site, and then over time, they seem to drop off. They seem to disperse out from those hotspots. And then a couple of years later, you start seeing the populations increasing. And what we think is happening is they really drain the trees that are there, particularly Tree of Heaven and others, favorable hosts, sort of weaken them, draining a lot of sap out of them. The trees kind of go dormant for a little bit. And then as the trees recover, it becomes an attractive habitat again. So it does seem like there's a bit of waxing and waning at the front. A lot of people said, oh, great, they're gone. And we say, yeah, just wait a couple of years before you can celebrate and keep on top of them in the meantime. It really, in many areas, we have to start treating it, designing our both philosophy and treatment that it's a chronic problem we have to stay on top of. So back to Secretary Redding, were there any lessons learned from the serious baby formula shortage this year? Supply chain.
Yeah, I think it's it's a supply chain discussion. It is a concentration of processing discussion. It's an international, processor and a relationship between nations discussion. It is looking around at a very, very basic, the most basic of nutrition needs of infants, and trying to figure out what we can do. And we're really pleased that we have the latest baby formula processor in Pennsylvania, right? I mean, it's the first one at Byhard in Reading. I think it's the first FDA approved in 10 years. So think about that, right? It's in Pennsylvania. It's right here. So that is a lesson for us. Now they need to grow the capacity there, but when you talk about lessons learned, I think for everybody, that should reveal both the fragility of the supply chain discussions. It should raise questions of public policy. It should raise issues of foreign investments and foreign ownership of critical assets. So there's a lot embedded inside of that. We're in a better place today, but the lesson, well, again, on top of COVID, is that it's about processing, it's about access, it's about capacity, it's about investments and public investments that we make. So I think having at least one here in PA that can be grown over time is the lesson I take from it. So we need to make more investment and be, I think, a lot smarter about who is investing, who owns things, how do we get access to it, right? Are we on the preferential list or not? Yeah, I think they're all basic elements for a basic commodity.
Well, that falls pretty naturally into the next question. What opportunities resulted from COVID-19 for the future of agriculture and food security? And I mentioned online, people became much more interested in online training. We went from 30,000 courses a year to over 600,000 courses a year within months. So people, we used to say, how do we do some of this online? They say, no, it all has to be in person. We've gotten over that now, which is good. But other things happened. We really did see the supply chain. We were incredibly vulnerable on supply chain. And the meat thing being one thing. When I saw pictures of piles of fruits and vegetables in Florida, I thought, ooh, this doesn't look good. So I was fortunate because we've got really great depth in the college. I was able to turn to Stefan Getz and Claudia Schmidt and say, what can you see happening in the supply chain for fruits and vegetables in Pennsylvania? And within a week, they turned back an analysis of that different than meat, qualitatively different from meat. It wasn't about the workers spreading it within the meat processing plant. A lot of the fruit processors were near Philadelphia anyhow, and picking up from the local community first, and then were unavailable to help process food. So it's a different kind of supply chain crisis. But that I think we've really learned about that. And if anybody had told me when I was growing up that in my lifetime, I'd see both another Spanish flu style pandemic and a land war in Europe, I would have said, nah, no chance. And certainly not within 2 years of each other. So not only did we have supply chain with COVID, we relearned the lessons of the war in Europe. So it's something we have to do more about. So already extensions jumped on it, and there's a website, Enabling Regional Food Systems with Value Chain Coordination, that you can jump onto. We're already advertising advice, but more research to follow. But I think if there's a good side, they taught us to be more prepared for disruption.
Yeah, I would add, I mean, certainly COVID revealed many things about us, our threshold for pain, right? Our capacity to lead, what we have in terms of assets in our local community, who we look to for resources. But within the agricultural sector, I think it did two things. One, certainly the outward looking, meaning where the public appreciation for ag and food and access to. I think that was really critical, and we continue to see the benefits of that. But I think it also provided sort of an opportunity to look inward, right? And to really assess, again, partly related to the previous question about what are we doing, in terms of adding value? What do we want to do in terms of direct market and access? Are there opportunities for further processing? And if so, where are they? What are they? And how do we form those types of relationships? I think there is an opportunity to look at the cooperative model, right? I look at the Allegheny grass-fed beef cooperative. I think it's a great model. I mean, 6, 7 growers, producers up there doing similar things, same mindset, recognizing they had to sort of leverage their own relationships in that community to extend their reach of the market. That's an inward looking, right? So I think that's an opportunity that came out of COVID as well. But the word, food security is there, and I think it's always, we'll say this, that it's important to recognize what happened during COVID, both in terms of food capacity, but also the food security it gave us in the way that we could extend that security to other people, right? And that was a really important moment that prior to that, I think a lot of folks would talk about food security, but not in the same tangible way. So I think that is one of the things I look at is there's an opportunity for us to directly connect those who are producing with those who are consuming, right? And whether you can afford to buy it, if you can't afford to buy it, can I help you in that charitable food system? That's a change of inward looking and really trying to recognize that opportunity. We do that through the Pennsylvania, the PASS program, the Pennsylvania Agricultural Surplus. But I think long-term, the connectedness between those who are hungry and those who produce it is really an important covenant, right? And how we represent that, how we respect that. So there's a lot inside of that. And then just final point would be sometimes it's the simplest things that we found in COVID about agriculture and what do you need. What's an example? Refrigeration, right? How many times, Mike, did that question come up with the fresh food financing or people who needed refrigeration or a point of access, to be able to provide milk to the charitable food system? And a lot of the food pantries didn't have a refrigerator, right? Didn't have a freezer. So things like that teach us that, yes, it's the big issues, but it's also sometimes the simplest ones, right? That we've got to pay attention to.
Yeah. So how is Pennsylvania transitioning to a more sustainable method of agriculture? What is the status of sustainable agricultural practices such as no-till and cover crops to build healthy soil and use less fertilizers? And I said in my opening remarks, I think we're doing a lot in that area. Pennsylvania's, if you look at the combination of no-till and cover cropping, we're among the nation's leaders. The top three states. And I think it's something we should capitalize on. Those growers should be getting benefits, a commodity premium for what they're doing. So, and I think there's lots of things that are talked about for regenerative agriculture, but no-till and cover cropping have been for decades clearly identified as among the most important things we can do. And still, I think we need to continue to put a lot of our focus in the first instance.
Yeah, I think we're making great progress, but there's so much more to do, right? So I think as you look at, just where we are, I think economics will drive a lot of this discussion, right? So at the end of the day, it's about, less, fuel and less tillage and less labor and less inputs. I mean, drive you to certain practices. Two is, I think, the public expectation around sustainability and how that is represented in the marketplace will also be a major driver. And so I think, we continue to make great progress, but I think collectively know that, there's a spectrum to this, right? It's not just a turn it and it appears. I mean, there's going to be a slow development. I'm intrigued by when I hear some of the USDA talk about cover crops, right? And the Midwest of this country is talking about cover crops. We've been in cover crops for 40 years, right? We had been in no-till for 40 years. And there are other parts of the country that are just saying, well, we'll be paid to do cover crops. I have a problem with that, right? Because I think that's so foundational and differentiates this eastern part of the country and resources. So as an example, that it's developmental. I think there's things we can do, but a lot of good work being done by Rodale, by Penn State, by PASA, by the No-Till Alliance. I look at those folks as really great thought leaders that ultimately will, get the practices we would in, but I think more importantly, get the public appreciation for those practices and having that be, again, an expectation that is monetized to me. I think there ought to be a way to monetize those types of investments. So we see that all inside of the sustainable ag practice discussion.
So the next question was directed at me. Is there a direct relationship between drones using NVDI, locating agricultural problem spots for fertilizer and insecticide, and the same technology used for healthy forests and forest efforts? Now, not every day that I get a question for College Connections, it sends me to the library. But I normalized difference vegetation index. It's called the NDVI. And because we have a very strong, robust college, I pulled a number of possible faculty who know about this. And our newly appointed head of agricultural and biological engineering, Suat Ermak, jumped right on it. I said, yeah, he's been trying various things. They are using some of the same things for forest health. There's lots of interesting tools are being developed. So if you're interested in following up on this, look up Suat Ermak, IRMAK, and contact him. Be able to fill you in a lot more than I will be able to. So that, Mary, we finished, I think, the first set of questions. We have some more coming in.
Yes. So I'm going to ask them a question, but if any of you have a question, raise your hand. And when he's answering, I'll bring the mic over to you. So what is the status of the EPA requirement to rethink the Pennsylvania WIP?
So there's no requirement for them to rethink it, right? There is a requirement for us to do it. Right? I'll just say that I think there's a constant sort of discussion about what to do, right? And I'm looking at Matt Royer, who's been, in the very, very center of these conversations. But I'll say a couple of things that I think are getting at the central part of the question is the expectation that both the EPA has of Pennsylvania and equally what the Pennsylvania has of the EPA. Right. I think the current budgets, the most recent budget that passed is a statement about sort of what we need to do and can do. Right. It's the Agriculture Conservation Systems Program, $154 million investment. But inside of that is also the need for technical assistance. There's need for additional USDA support, which we're receiving EPA support. But I think the issue for us, most importantly, is making sure that whatever we're doing is captured and recognized within the the requirements to meet the load reductions, right? And Matt, if you want to share here, you're welcome to do that. But I think that's my take on the question is there's always going to be tension in this discussion because, listen, there's always tension between the aspirational and the practical, right? We aspire to lose weight, right? Reality is maybe it doesn't happen as quick as you want to. And I think some of that's inside of this, but we have to, aspire to reduce the nutrients. It's going to take a little longer than I think it needs to or should, right? But that's the tension point around the Chesapeake Bay and the WIP.
Yeah, I agree, Secretary. There's a tension there, and it's built upon the level of expectations, the timeline for meeting those, and just the reality that agriculture is a huge and really important sector in Pennsylvania, and it's a much heavier lift in this state than a lot of the other Bay states. So that is something to keep in mind. And I think as you mentioned, Secretary, the recent investments in the new budget are a big part of that. Having the resources to support farmers to implement conservation practices to improve water quality, that's going to be a really big help. Improving the opportunity for technical assistance, and Penn State can play a role in that. We actually have a undergraduate certificate in agricultural conservation and stewardship that really sets students up for moving into those careers at conservation districts and NRCS and those other technical assistance providers. And then the accounting that you mentioned is really, really important. And we've led efforts to allow farmers to voluntarily self-report their practices through surveys that we send out. We have one right now that's ongoing, processing the data from 14 priority counties across the Bay watershed. So all those things together and the many partners working in Pennsylvania together, I think it's going to be able to make this heavy lift.
So the other thing just to mention is the Agriculture Conservation Assistance Program, which is the new bill that was passed. It's taking some of the COVID relief money, even if temporary, and putting basically hundreds of millions of dollars into this over a short time span. And we're hoping to work with that. And I think Senator Gene Yaw should get a huge amount of credit for pulling that one together. Yeah, we're on it.
You know me, Dean Roush, I always have a comment to make. As we look around these posters on the wall, and we note the first Ag Progress Days in 1976, we've added 110 million people to this country since that date. And those people have an environmental footprint. And we have to recognize that. When I drive through Lancaster County and I see all the houses and developments building up there, and I think about the importance of farmland preservation, how do we feed that 110 million more people? Ag progress. That's how we feed them. And we're producing food with a lower environmental footprint than we ever have. But as Dean Roush said, our challenges still lies ahead of us. Or maybe it was you, Secretary, that said we still have much more to do. And the way we do that is by society investing in what we do at Penn State in our research and extension and education programs. We've had a tremendous partnership with the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture and the state legislature in Pennsylvania supporting this effort. And the fruits of that are seen in the progress in ag we've seen, the ability to feed sustainably that 110 million more people and to be able to do that with a reduced environmental footprint per unit of food produced.
Okay, next question, Mary.
Well, for those who don't know him, this is Steve Lurch. He's our senior associate dean in the college. So, yes. So any chance of Pennsylvania providing financial assistance for cover crops?
So we do in part, I think, inside REAP, looking at Greg Hosted, our deputy secretary, right? Is that covered inside the REAP? Pardon me? Or inside the Conservation Excellence Program. So let us take a look at it, right? I know we've talked about it. State Conservation Commission looked at it as a way to incentivize, whether we pay for cover crops or not. So sort of a long answer to say, let's take a look at it, because I think we've got some capacity to do it. The question is, whether that's a practice you want to start paying for, right?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that's really interesting about the climate smart agriculture program is that it's really seeking to give commodity premiums for people who are doing climate smart things. So instead of maybe the state providing a subsidy, it should come, hopefully move to a system where people who are using really good practices would get an eco label for their product and be supported that way too. Other questions?
Are there questions from the audience? Just raise your hand.
I suppose this kind of goes with the comment that was just said by Steve. Talking about sustainability in agriculture, what is Pennsylvania doing to lower the amount of food waste that comes from processing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's about, again, in the theme of sustainability, food waste. I think, a couple of things. One, just the awareness of how much food is wasted, right? Is making sure that, because then you're sort of sensitized to it versus, just it throw it away and it's gone. Again, I think that was, something of, that got heightened during COVID as well. But so what are we doing? I mean, I think there's, a number of, grant, efforts within DEP, and they're supporting us. We're doing the digesters and making sure we divert it. It's making sure that, the PASS program and you're harvesting and setting these products into the charitable food system before they are waste, right? I think that's a piece of it. Look at the produce terminal last week in Philadelphia that's directing a lot of produce into, the digester area. So again, open ideas and thoughts. I see Hannah off to the side, Hannah Smith-Baker, who's talked about the food waste for some years, but open ideas and thoughts about what we can do. But it's an important part of the sustainability discussion. Yeah. Other thoughts or opinions?
It's another one of those,
on the food waste.
it's another one of those first world, third world problems, because in third world, there's about 25 to 40% of the food gets lost while it's being grown or in its primary storage. And in Western countries, there's 30 to 40% gets lost after it gets to the store.
A related question we have is in meat processing, is that primarily a workforce limitation or facility challenges and startup facilities, costs, regulations, et cetera?
All of the above. Yeah, I think it ultimately becomes a labor issue, but I think the very first concern is, assuming that somebody wants to have that processing capacity and be USDA certified. To do that, we've got 100 USDA certified facilities in PA, 147 that are custom exempt facilities in the state, which surprises a lot of folks. So from our perspective, is how do you get those who are, either currently USDA certified to expand if they want to, or if they're custom exempt to actually become USDA certified. So there's a bundle of things inside. There's investments. I will say, just as a footnote, that I think there's a lot of interest in expanding if they can find the resources to expand. Right. So USDA resources are there. We just made changes in the very small meat processing grant program that opened last week. That's a Pennsylvania piece that's open. So I think it's a lot of pieces, right? We're going to have to figure out the workforce components. It's partly what Dr. Campbell and team are doing at the butcher school and right in the apprenticeship program. So. But to cut through all of that, I'll just say if somebody's interested in making sure that we're talking to you about it and trying to help you navigate through what the federal and state resources are. Yes, there's a regulatory piece to that, but that has not been the issue that's inhibited somebody expanding. It's been sort of the capital and then workforce.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience here? We have 5 minutes left. You want to make closing remarks?
I think just coming back to this point about what all the opportunities are, I think there are enormous opportunities for Pennsylvania. And we need to do more about trying to plan out how we're going to exploit them. I mean, in the case I mentioned fruits and vegetables, because of what's happening in the Western United States. But another problem is as it's growing hotter and hotter in the southern southeastern United States in particular, there'll be increased heat stress on animals there. Producers will want to look to move north. That's probably an opportunity for Western Pennsylvania, but we need to plan it out so we know what we're going to do with manure and so forth. There's a bit of a terraforming problem for Western Pennsylvania because its soils are not that great to start with. So maybe this could be a plus if we figure out how to link animal agriculture soil improvement a bit better. So there are a lot of things with great potential, but it's going to require a bit of planning and advocacy to get it across the line. I think we have to. I've always thought that if we were going to get animal agriculture started in Western Pennsylvania, we ought to start by first bringing people to Eastern Pennsylvania. And I remember one time when I was on a tour and we stepped out next to a pig operation and someone said, well, where are the pigs? I don't smell anything. Great line. It's not your grandfather's agriculture anymore, but it is creating jobs. But I think there are a lot of things that are possible, but we need to plan them out and start moving on them pretty quickly because the needs are great and increasing.
Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts. One is the opportunities in agriculture, I think, are greater today than they've ever been. Right. But they look different. Right. The people in those conversations are different. Society that is expecting things from us is different. Right. But when you look at all of the big issues of our time, agriculture is in the center of those. Right. It's about health and it's economic development, it's workforce and the environment and education. And there are pieces directly or indirectly tied in and through agriculture. And I think that is an amazing sort of place to be. Right. With that come all of those questions about how do you do this? Right. How do you finance this? How do you make it work? How do you deal with issues of the environment and sustainability? And how do you deal with economic pressures? And so I think that is a really important sort of conversation for us to have because it's going to take a lot of different people in the conversation, a lot of people at the table to help us solve these problems. But really critically important part of our community and of our society. Secondly, when I think about Pennsylvania, I mean, there are you can make your list of challenges. Right. Land values, right? We hear it all the time. A really important part of the conversation when you're in a competitive market, land values are really critical and how that gets, represented. But I think about, to the Dean's point, about a state with 41 inches of natural rain, the second largest producer of natural gas in the nation, right? A port that links us around the world. The land-grant university, second to none. Having a veterinary school in Pennsylvania and a land grant, right? Having 50 million people in the neighborhood. They're all challenges, but they are amazing opportunities because those folks have the same expectation that you and I do. Eat 3 times a day, right? So how do you do that? I think that is the great challenge for us, and ag is the place that's going to touch them. We have a list. Some have better answers than others, I can tell you, but I think the opportunity there for the industry and the growing recognition of the value of ag to be a solution, right? To health issues, to climate issues, to sustainability issues, to mental health capacity. All of that is inside the work that we do and the things that we're entrusted with. So really honored to do it.
Well, it's time for us to wrap up. Thanks as always, Secretary Redding, for joining. I always love these kinds of conversations.
Likewise.
So I also want to thank all of you for being in person with us today and those participating via Zoom. We really do appreciate your interest and support of the college and agriculture more broadly. And I want to encourage everybody to come right back here at 1 p.m., a little before 1 p.m., when we have the session on beginning farmers and transitions. So there'll be a lot more variation on some of these themes. And also join us in September for the September College Connections, where I'll be joined by Erica Mackinger, who's Assistant Professor of Entomology, to learn more about the latest research and information on common ticks and tick-borne diseases in Pennsylvania. To register for that, you just have to go on the college website and search for College Connections. So I hope to see you later today and have a great couple of days at Ag Progress Days. Thank you all for being here.